Welcome to Sleepless Survivors. Tonight, we journey back through the sands of time to explore the mysterious and haunting rituals of ancient Egypt. Let your mind drift as we uncover the sacred ceremonies, the hidden practices, and the profound spiritual beliefs that guided one of history's most fascinating civilizations. Close your eyes, relax, and let the ancient world wash over you like the gentle waves of the Nile. The sun sets over the endless desert, casting long shadows across the Valley of the Kings. In the fading light, priests in white linen robes gather at the entrance of a temple, their faces solemn, their movements precise. They carry offering bowls filled with incense, bread, and wine. The air grows thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense as they prepare for the evening ritual, a ceremony that will bridge the world of the living with the realm of the dead. Ancient Egypt was a civilization built upon ritual. Every aspect of life, from birth to death and beyond, was governed by elaborate ceremonies designed to maintain cosmic order, honour the gods, and ensure passage into the afterlife. These were not mere superstitions or primitive beliefs. They were sophisticated spiritual practices developed over thousands of years, refined by generations of priests and priestesses who dedicated their lives to understanding the mysteries of existence. Tonight, we will explore these rituals in depth. We will walk through the shadowed halls of temples where forbidden ceremonies took place in the dead of night. We will witness the opening of the mouth ceremony, designed to restore life to the deceased. We will observe the cult of Osiris, god of the underworld, and the secret rites performed to ensure resurrection. We will learn about the practice of mummification, a process so intricate and sacred that it took 70 days to complete. And we will discover the darker aspects of Egyptian spirituality, the protective spells, the curses inscribed on tomb walls, and the rituals meant to ward off evil spirits. Let yourself sink deeper into relaxation as we begin our journey. Feel the weight of your body pressing into the mattress. Notice your breath, slow and steady. With each exhale, you release the tensions of the day. With each inhale, you draw in the peace of this ancient world. The ancient Egyptians believed that the universe was governed by Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, order, and justice. Ma'at was both a goddess and a concept, representing the natural order established at the moment of creation. Without Ma'at, the world would descend into chaos, into Isfet, the destructive force of disorder. Every ritual performed in ancient Egypt was designed to uphold Ma'at, to keep the cosmos in balance, to ensure that the sun would rise each morning and that the Nile would flood each year, bringing life to the land. The priests understood that they were not just performing ceremonies, they were actively participating in the maintenance of reality itself. When a high priest performed the daily temple ritual, washing and clothing the statue of a god, he was not engaging in empty symbolism. He was providing sustenance to the divine force that sustained all life. The gods needed humans just as humans needed the gods. It was a relationship of mutual dependence, a sacred contract that could not be broken. In the deepest part of the night, when most people slept, the priest would enter the inner sanctum of the temple. This was the most sacred space, the place where the god's statue resided. Only the highest-ranking priests were permitted entry. They would approach with reverence, carrying offerings and reciting prayers in the ancient language. The flickering lamplight would cast dancing shadows on the walls, covered with hieroglyphs that told stories of creation, of divine battles, of the eternal struggle between order and chaos. The priest would unseal the doors of the shrine, a symbolic act representing the opening of the horizon where Ra, the sun god, emerged each morning. As the doors swung open, the priest would prostrate himself before the statue, acknowledging the divine presence within. He would then proceed to wash the statue with water from a sacred pool, dress it in fresh linen, and apply cosmetics and perfumes. He would present offerings of food and drink, knowing that the god would consume the spiritual essence of these gifts, leaving the physical matter behind. This daily ritual was called the cult of the divine statue, and it was performed in every temple throughout Egypt, from the grand complexes at Karnak and Luxor to smaller provincial shrines. The ritual ensured that the god remained present in the world, able to hear prayers and grant blessings. Without it, the divine force would withdraw, and disaster would follow. Let your breathing slow even further. Feel yourself drifting, like a boat on the Nile at sunset, carried gently by the current. The ancient world surrounds you, but you are safe. protected by the same rituals that protected the people of Egypt for thousands of years. Death was not the end in ancient Egypt. It was a transformation, a journey into the afterlife that required careful preparation. The Egyptians developed one of the most elaborate funerary traditions in human history, centered on the belief that the soul consisted of multiple parts. There was the Ka, the life force, the vital essence that distinguished the living from the dead. There was the Ba, the personality, often depicted as a bird with a human head that could travel between the world of the living and the world of the dead. There was the Ak, the glorified spirit that resulted from the successful union of the Ka and Ba in the afterlife. And there was the body itself, which needed to be preserved so that these spiritual components would have a home to return to. Mummification was the most important ritual for preserving the body. The process was conducted by specialized priests who worked in the place of purification, a workshop usually located on the western bank of the Nile, the side associated with the setting sun and the realm of the dead. These priests wore masks of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, transforming themselves into living representations of the divine. The mummification process began shortly after death. The body was brought to the workshop and laid upon a slanted table. The embalmers would first insert a long metal hook through the nostril, breaking through the ethmoid bone to access the cranial cavity. With careful, practiced movements, they would extract the brain piece by piece, pulling it out through the nose. The Egyptians did not understand the brain's importance. They believed consciousness resided in the heart, so the brain was discarded while other organs were carefully preserved. Next came the abdominal incision, a cut made on the left side of the body. Through this opening, the embalmers would remove the stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs. Each organ was washed with palm wine and spices, then dried with natron, a naturally occurring salt that absorbed moisture. These organs were placed in 4 canopic jars, each protected by a different god. The liver went into the jar guarded by Imseti, who had a human head. The lungs went into the jar protected by Hapi, who had the head of a baboon. The stomach went into the jar watched over by Duamutef, who had the head of a jackal. And the intestines went into the jar guarded by Kibbesenuf, who had the head of a falcon. The heart, however, was left in place. The heart was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and memory. In the afterlife, it would be weighed against the feather of Maat to determine if the deceased had lived a just life. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the person would be granted eternal life. If it was heavier, burdened with sin and wrongdoing, it would be devoured by Amit, a demon with the head of a crocodile, the body of a leopard, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This was the second death, the final annihilation from which there was no return. After the organs were removed, the body cavity was packed with natron and left to dry for 40 days. During this time, the body would lose all moisture, becoming desiccated and preserved. The natron absorbed not just water but also body fats, leaving behind a leathery but intact corpse. When the 40 days were complete, the natron was removed and the body was washed again with water from the Nile. The cavity was then stuffed with linen, sawdust or sand to restore a more natural shape to the body. The embalmers would then begin the wrapping process, which could take another 30 days. Starting with the fingers and toes, they would carefully wind strips of linen around each digit, securing them with resin. As they wrapped, they would place protective amulets between the layers, each one inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead, magical texts designed to protect the deceased on their journey through the underworld. Feel the rhythm of the wrapping, the careful, methodical process. Let it lull you deeper into relaxation. Each layer of linen is like a blanket of protection, wrapping you in safety and peace. The amulets placed within the mummy wrappings were not decorative. They were essential magical tools, each serving a specific purpose. The scarab beetle placed over the heart was inscribed with a spell that prevented the heart from testifying against the deceased during the weighing ceremony. The Jed pillar represented stability and the backbone of Osiris. The Tayet, or Isis knot, provided the protection of the goddess. The Eye of Horus offered healing and wholeness. There were amulets shaped like the 2 fingers of the god, placed near the embalming incision to help it heal. There were amulets in the form of snakes, frogs, and other creatures, each carrying its own protective power. The priest reciting spells as they worked believed that words had creative power. In the Egyptian worldview, to speak something was to bring it into being. The gods themselves created the world through divine speech. When the god Ptah spoke, his words manifested as reality. When Ra spoke the secret names of things, those things came into existence. Similarly, when a priest spoke a spell over a mummy, that spell became an active force, protecting the deceased from the many dangers of the afterlife. The journey through the underworld known as the Duat was treacherous. The deceased had to navigate through 12 hours of night, each hour presenting new challenges and obstacles. There were lakes of fire to cross, monstrous serpents to defeat, and gates guarded by fearsome demons. Each gate had a name that must be known. Each demon had to be addressed properly. The Book of the Dead provided the necessary knowledge, a guidebook for the afterlife that contained spells, passwords, and magical formulas. One of the most important spells was the negative confession, recited before the 42 judges in the Hall of Two Truths. The deceased would stand before these divine assessors and declare all the sins they had not committed. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not told lies. I have not caused pain. The list went on, covering every conceivable transgression. This was not a confession of guilt, but a proclamation of innocence, a magical assertion that would help tip the scales in the deceased's favour during the weighing of the heart. But the most dramatic moment came during the opening of the mouth ceremony, a ritual performed on the mummy or on a statue of the deceased to restore their senses and abilities. Without this ceremony, the deceased would be helpless in the afterlife, unable to eat, drink, speak, or move. The ritual was typically performed on the day of burial, right before the mummy was sealed in the tomb. The ceremony took place in front of the tomb, with the mummy standing upright, propped against a priest or held in position by supports. The officiating priest, again dressed as Anubis, would approach with an array of ritual implements. There was the adze, a copper blade shaped like a crescent that was touched to the mouth and eyes of the mummy. There was the peseshkaf, a flint knife used in the same manner. There was a ceremonial hoof and a finger of sacrifice, which some scholars believe may have been an actual severed finger from a sacrificial bull, though others think it was a symbolic representation. As each implement touched the mummy, the priest would recite spells, calling upon the power of the gods to restore function to that part of the body. Your mouth is opened by Ptah with the blade of metal that opened the mouths of the gods. The ritual was based on mythology, specifically the story of how Horus opened the mouth of his father Osiris after the god was murdered and dismembered by his brother Set. By reenacting this divine event, the priests believed they were tapping into the same cosmic power that originally brought life from death. The ceremony also involved offerings of incense, purification with water, and the presentation of the deceased's possessions, which would be buried with them. These grave goods ranged from simple pottery and food offerings for the poor to elaborate furniture, chariots, and servant statues for the wealthy. The most privileged were buried with shabti, small figurines inscribed with spells that would animate them in the afterlife to perform labour on behalf of the deceased. Some tombs contained hundreds of these figurines, ensuring that the deceased would never have to work in the fields of the afterlife. Let yourself imagine the scene. The desert sun beating down, the mummy standing before the tomb entrance silent and still, the priest moving with purpose, touching the sacred implements to lips and eyes, the words of power echoing across the sand, and then the sealing of the tomb, the final barrier between the living world and the realm of eternity. Not all Egyptian rituals were designed to help the dead. Many were intended to protect the living from supernatural threats. The ancient Egyptians lived in a world filled with invisible dangers. There were demons who brought disease and misfortune. There were the spirits of the restless dead who had not received proper burial. There were malevolent gods and divine messengers who could be called upon by sorcerers to harm their enemies. To guard against these threats, people employed a variety of protective rituals and magical practices. Homes were marked with sacred symbols. Children wore amulets to ward off the evil eye. Pregnant women sought the protection of deities like Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, and Bez, the dwarf god with a leonine face who frightened away demons with his fierce appearance and the rattles he carried. One common protective practice involved creating magical wands from hippopotamus ivory. These wands, often called apotropaic wands, were carved with images of protective deities and mythological creatures. They were used to draw a magical circle around a bed or a room, creating a barrier that evil spirits could not cross. The wand would be activated through the recitation of spells, transforming it from a physical object into a conduit of divine power. Another protective ritual involved the creation of execration texts, curses written on pottery bowls or clay figurines. These texts were not just expressions of anger or revenge. They were magical weapons designed to neutralize threats before they could manifest. The ritual worked by writing the names of enemies, both human and supernatural, on a vessel or figurine. The names could be those of foreign nations, rebellious cities, or specific individuals who posed a threat. Once the names were inscribed, the vessel or figurine would be ritually broken, symbolically destroying the power of those enemies. The broken pieces were then buried in cemeteries, or thrown into bodies of water, places where they would be surrounded by the forces of death and dissolution. Some execration texts have been found buried upside down or bound with cord, additional measures to ensure that the cursed individuals remained powerless. These rituals were not performed by ordinary citizens, but by trained priests who understood the complex magical formulas required to make them effective. There was a darker side to Egyptian magic as well. While most religious authorities focused on maintaining Ma'at and protecting people from harm, there were practitioners who used their knowledge for more sinister purposes. Curses could be placed on tombs to protect them from robbers, but they could also be directed at living people. Love spells, death spells, and binding spells have all been found in the archaeological record, often written on papyrus or inscribed on lead tablets. One category of spell was designed to send nightmares to enemies, or to prevent them from sleeping. These spells invoked the powers of malevolent deities or demons, asking them to torment the target with terrifying dreams and restless nights. Another type of spell sought to bind a person's shadow, or their name, both of which were considered integral parts of the soul. By gaining control over someone's shadow or knowing their true name, a sorcerer could exert power over that person, causing illness, madness, or even death. The fear of magical attack was so prevalent that protective counterspells were common. People would wear amulets inscribed with spells that deflected curses back to their sender. They would place protective stelae in their homes, stone slabs carved with images of the young god Horus subduing dangerous animals, symbolizing the triumph of order over chaos. These stelae, known as sipi, were believed to have healing properties. Water poured over them would absorb the magical power of the inscriptions, and could then be drunk as medicine or sprinkled around a dwelling for protection. Feel the weight of these ancient fears, but know they cannot touch you here. You are safe in this moment, protected by distance and time. Let any anxiety flow out of you with each breath, leaving only peace behind. The cult of Osiris was central to Egyptian funerary beliefs, and gave rise to some of the most mysterious rituals in ancient Egyptian religion. Osiris was the god of the afterlife, of death and resurrection, and his myth formed the foundation of Egyptian understanding of what happened after death. According to the myth, Osiris was once a wise and benevolent king who taught humanity the arts of civilization, agriculture, and law. His brother Set, consumed by jealousy, plotted against him. At a great feast, Set presented a beautifully decorated coffin and announced that he would give it to whoever fit inside it perfectly. When Osiris lay down in the coffin, Set and his conspirators slammed the lid shut, nailed it closed, and sealed it with molten lead. They then threw the coffin into the Nile, where it floated away and eventually became lodged in a tree in the land of Byblos. Osiris's wife, Isis, embarked on a desperate search for her husband. When she finally found the coffin and brought it back to Egypt, Set discovered it, and, in a rage, cut Osiris's body into 14 pieces, scattering them throughout Egypt. Isis, with the help of her sister Nephthys and the jackal god Anubis, searched for all the pieces and reassembled Osiris's body. She could not find his phallus, which had been eaten by a fish, so she fashioned a replacement from gold. Through magical rituals and incantations, Isis was able to briefly restore Osiris to life, long enough to conceive a son, Horus, who would eventually avenge his father by defeating Set. Osiris, however, did not return to the world of the living. Instead, he became the ruler of the underworld, the judge of the dead, and the symbol of resurrection. His myth promised that death was not the end, that through proper ritual and divine favour, one could be reborn into eternal life, just as Osiris had been. The mysteries of Osiris were secret rituals performed annually at Abydos, the city most sacred to the god. These mysteries reenacted the death and resurrection of Osiris, allowing participants to mystically experience the god's journey through death to eternal life. The details of these rituals were closely guarded secrets, known only to the initiated priests and priestesses. What we do know comes from fragmentary references and later accounts. The mysteries began with a procession carrying an image of Osiris from the temple to his symbolic tomb. This was accompanied by ritual lamentation, with participants mourning the death of the god as if he were a beloved family member. Professional mourners would tear their clothes, throw dust on their heads, and wail in grief. This was not theatrical performance but genuine emotional expression, a collective outpouring of sorrow for the death that touches all living things. After the ritual burial, there would be a period of mourning lasting several days. During this time, priests would perform secret ceremonies within the temple, ceremonies that symbolically reassembled Osiris's body and restored him to life. When the god was finally resurrected, the mourning would transform into celebration. There would be music, dancing, feasting, and the raising of the Jed pillar, a ceremonial act that symbolized the resurrection of Osiris and the stability of the cosmic order. Those who participated in the mysteries believed they were forming a personal connection with Osiris, ensuring their own resurrection after death. Some scholars have compared the Assyrian mysteries to later mystery religions in Greece and Rome, suggesting that they may have influenced the development of religious thought throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. Another important ritual associated with Osiris was the creation of Osiris beds, or corn mummies. These were effigies of the god made from a mixture of soil and grain seeds, shaped in the form of Osiris and placed in a wooden frame. The effigy would be watered and allowed to sprout, with the growing grain symbolizing resurrection and the cycle of death and rebirth. These corn mummies were buried with the deceased or placed in tombs as a powerful symbol of regeneration. The Osiris cult also involved the creation of ritual gardens within temple complexes. These gardens represented the field of reeds, the Egyptian equivalent of paradise, where the blessed dead would spend eternity farming and feasting. The gardens were carefully maintained by temple staff and were planted with the crops that would nourish the deceased in the afterlife, including barley, emmer wheat, and flax. Water channels running through these gardens symbolized the celestial Nile that flowed through the afterlife. Let the image of these gardens fill your mind. Green fields stretching to the horizon under an eternal sun, the sound of water flowing through irrigation channels, the scent of lotus blossoms floating on sacred pools. This is the peace the ancient Egyptians sought, and it can be yours now as you drift deeper into sleep. The priesthood in ancient Egypt was not a unified organization, but rather a collection of different cults, each dedicated to a particular deity. Priests were not necessarily spiritual leaders in the way we might think of them today. They were ritual specialists, technicians of the sacred whose job was to maintain the proper relationship between humans and gods. To become a priest required years of training. Young men, and in some cases women, would enter temple service as children, learning to read and write hieroglyphs, memorizing the sacred texts, and studying the complex ritual procedures. They learned astronomy and mathematics, necessary for calculating the festival calendar and determining the proper times for rituals. They studied medicine and pharmacology, as priests often served as healers. They learned the art of dream interpretation, as dreams were considered messages from the gods. Priests were organized into a hierarchical structure. At the bottom were the Wab priests, purifiers who performed basic maintenance tasks and assisted in rituals. Above them were the Hemnetcher, the servants of the god, who had more direct involvement in ceremonial activities. The most senior priests were the Hemnetcher Tepi, high priests who supervised the cult and performed the most sacred rituals. In some temples there were also lector priests, specialists who read the sacred texts during ceremonies, and Sem priests, who wore leopard skin robes and had special duties in funerary rituals. Purity was essential for anyone who served in the temple. Priests had to undergo ritual purification before entering sacred spaces. They would bathe multiple times a day in the sacred lake within the temple complex. They would shave their entire bodies every other day, removing all hair to prevent any impurity from clinging to them. They wore only white linen clothing, as animal products like wool and leather were considered unclean in a ritual context. They abstained from certain foods, particularly pork and fish, which were associated with Set and chaos. These purity requirements were not permanent conditions. Priests served in rotating shifts, typically 1 month on duty followed by 3 months of normal life. During their off-duty months they could marry, eat whatever they wished, and engage in ordinary occupations. But when their turn came to serve in the temple, they had to put aside their worldly lives and become living embodiments of divine purity. Some rituals could only be performed by priests who had undergone additional purification. Before major festivals, priests might spend weeks in seclusion, fasting and purifying themselves to an even greater degree. They would wear specific amulets and recite prayers constantly, maintaining an altered state of consciousness that allowed them to serve as intermediaries between the human and divine realms. The most exclusive rituals took place in the inner sanctum of the temple, in chambers so sacred that even most priests were not permitted to enter. These were the places where the most powerful magic was performed, where statues of gods were animated through secret ceremonies, where oracles were consulted and divine will was made known. One such ritual was the House of Life, a ceremony performed in a special chamber within the temple complex. The House of Life was both a physical location and a concept, representing the place where knowledge was preserved and transmitted. Here, scribes would copy sacred texts, create magical papyri, and compose new hymns and spells. But the House of Life was also where certain resurrection rituals were performed, ceremonies designed to bring statues and images to life, imbuing them with divine consciousness. The exact procedures used in these rituals are largely unknown, as they were among the most closely guarded secrets of the priesthood. We know that they involved the use of specific materials, including certain types of wood, precious stones, and metals that were believed to be divine substances. The ritual likely included the anointing of the statue with sacred oils, the fumigation with special incenses, and the recitation of spells of animation. When complete, the statue was no longer just carved stone or moulded gold. It was a living vessel for the god's presence, capable of seeing, hearing, and responding to prayers. Feel yourself becoming lighter, as if you too are being transformed. The boundaries between waking and sleeping blur. You are floating now, suspended between worlds, just as the ancient priests stood between the realm of humans and the realm of gods. Egyptian temples were not just places of worship. They were cosmic machines, designed according to precise principles to mirror the structure of the universe itself. The temple represented the primordial mound, the first land that emerged from the waters of chaos at the beginning of creation. The floor of the temple gradually rose as one moved from the entrance to the sanctuary, symbolizing the ascent from the chaotic waters to the ordered world. The temple's layout followed a pattern that was repeated throughout Egypt with only minor variations. The entrance was marked by massive pylons, trapezoidal gateways decorated with scenes of the pharaohs smiting Egypt's enemies. These pylons represented the horizon, the place where sky meets earth, where each day the sun was reborn. Passing through the pylons meant crossing from the ordinary world into sacred space. Beyond the pylons lay an open courtyard, a public space where common people could gather during festivals. Here they could present offerings and petition the gods, though they could go no further. Beyond the courtyard was the hyperstyle hall, a forest of enormous columns decorated with plant motifs, representing the marsh that surrounded the primordial mound. Only priests and officials could enter this space. The columns were carved to resemble lotus and papyrus plants, the vegetation of the Nile, and their capitals bloomed near the ceiling, which was painted blue and decorated with stars to represent the sky. As one progressed deeper into the temple, the ceilings became lower, the rooms smaller and darker. This was intentional, creating a sense of entering the very heart of creation, moving backward in time to the moment before the world existed. Finally, one reached the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, where the statue of the god resided in almost complete darkness. Here, the divine presence was most concentrated, most powerful, most dangerous. The sanctuary was sealed with multiple doors, and each door was protected by spells. To pass through these doors without permission meant risking divine wrath. Stories were told of impious, individuals who violated the sanctuary and were struck down by invisible forces, consumed by fire or driven mad. Whether these were actual occurrences or cautionary tales meant to prevent trespass, they reflected the genuine belief that divine power was not to be approached carelessly. The temple complex included many other structures beyond the main building. There were subsidiary temples dedicated to related deities. There were workshops where cult statues, ritual implements, and offerings were created. There were storerooms filled with grain, incense, oils, and precious materials. There were libraries containing the sacred texts, and there was the sacred lake, a rectangular pool of water where priests performed their ablutions and where certain rituals involving boats and water processions took place. The sacred lake was more than just a practical facility. It represented the primordial ocean, Nun, from which all creation emerged. During certain festivals, priests would float ceremonial barks across the lake, reenacting the sun god's nightly journey through the underworld. These boats were not simple rafts, but elaborate constructions, gilded and decorated, carrying statues of the gods and sacred objects. The most important festival involving these boats was the Opet festival, celebrated at Thebes. During this festival, the statue of Amun, king of the gods, would be carried from his temple at Karnak to the temple at Luxor, a journey of about 2 miles. The statue travelled in a sacred bark, carried on the shoulders of priests and accompanied by musicians, dancers, and jubilant crowds. The journey symbolised the renewal of divine power and the reaffirmation of the pharaoh's right to rule. At night, the procession would take on a more mysterious character. Torches would light the way, creating flickering shadows that danced across the temple walls. The air would be thick with incense smoke, obscuring vision and creating an otherworldly atmosphere. Priests wearing masks of various deities would perform ritual dances, their movements precise and symbolic. To witness such a procession was to glimpse the divine order that sustained the world, to participate directly in the cosmic drama of creation and renewal. Let yourself be carried by this procession. You are moving slowly, steadily, toward a place of rest and renewal. The journey is almost complete. Soon you will arrive at the sanctuary of sleep, where all is peace and restoration. The pharaoh occupied a unique position in Egyptian religion. He was not merely a political leader, but a living god, the incarnation of Horus during his lifetime, and identified with Osiris after death. Every action the pharaoh took had cosmic significance. When he led the army, he was maintaining Ma'at by defeating chaos. When he performed rituals in the temple, he was sustaining the divine order. When he built monuments, he was creating eternal homes for the gods. The coronation of a new pharaoh was one of the most elaborate rituals in ancient Egypt, designed to transform a mortal prince into a divine king. The ceremony took place in the temple and involved multiple stages, each representing a different aspect of the pharaoh's divine nature. First came the purification, where the new pharaoh was ritually cleansed with water from the sacred lake. This washing symbolized rebirth, the emergence of a new being from the primordial waters. Next, the pharaoh was anointed with sacred oils, substances imbued with divine essence that transformed his mortal flesh into something more than human. Then came the receiving of the royal regalia. Each item carried deep symbolic meaning. The double crown combined the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, representing the pharaoh's rule over the unified land. The crook and flail represented his role as shepherd of his people and his power to punish wrongdoers. The false beard, attached with straps, connected the pharaoh to the gods, who were always depicted wearing such beards. The uraeus, a cobra symbol worn on the brow, represented the protective power of the goddess Wadjet, ready to spit fire at any who threatened the king. The most important moment came when the pharaoh's throne names were announced. Egyptian royalty had 5 names, but the most significant were the prenomen and nomen, enclosed in cartouches, oval rings that symbolized everything the sun encircles. These names were chosen carefully, often incorporating the names of important gods and making statements about the pharaoh's relationship with the divine. When these names were spoken aloud during the coronation, the transformation was complete. The man who entered the temple had become a god who would leave it. Throughout his reign, the pharaoh's most important duty was to perform the daily temple ritual, though in practice, priests usually performed it on his behalf. In theory, every ritual in every temple throughout Egypt was performed by the pharaoh. The reliefs on temple walls always show the king making offerings and conducting ceremonies, even though historical records make it clear that the king could not possibly have been physically present in all these locations. This was possible because of the Egyptian concept of divine delegation. The pharaoh as a god could be present in multiple places simultaneously through his divine nature. More practically, when a priest performed a ritual, he was acting as the pharaoh's proxy, channeling the king's divine power. The priest became, for the duration of the ceremony, an extension of the pharaoh himself. The pharaoh also had responsibilities in ensuring Ma'at through the administration of justice. He was the supreme judge, and serious cases could be appealed to him directly. But more importantly, he was expected to issue decrees that reflected divine law, to protect the weak from the strong, to prevent corruption, and to maintain social order. A pharaoh who failed in these duties was not just a bad ruler, he was failing in his cosmic role, allowing chaos to seep into the world. When a pharaoh died, the transition was perilous. The land was without its divine protector, vulnerable to chaos. The mummification and burial had to be completed as quickly as possible, and the new pharaoh had to be crowned without delay. The 70 days of mummification were therefore a time of both mourning and anxiety, a liminal period when the cosmic order hung in the balance. The pharaoh's funeral was the most elaborate of all Egyptian funerary rituals, involving multiple processions, numerous ceremonies, and the burial of countless treasures. The pharaoh's tomb was not just a resting place, but a palace for eternity, complete with chambers for different activities, storage rooms filled with provisions, and walls covered with spells and images designed to ensure the pharaoh's continued existence and power in the afterlife. Feel the weight of kingship, and then let it go. You need not bear such burdens. You need only rest, letting the world continue without your effort, secure in the knowledge that morning will come and all will be as it should be. Among the most mysterious aspects of Egyptian religion were the oracles, means by which humans could communicate directly with the gods and receive divine guidance. Oracles were consulted for important decisions, to resolve disputes, to determine guilt or innocence, and to predict the future. The most famous oracle was that of a moon at Siwa Oasis, far in the western desert. This oracle was consulted by Alexander the Great, who journeyed across the dangerous desert to ask the god whether he was truly the son of Zeus, as he claimed. The god, through his priests, confirmed Alexander's divine parentage, a pronouncement that had profound political implications for Alexander's conquest of Egypt and beyond. But there were many other oracles throughout Egypt, and they employed various methods of divination. One common method involved the sacred bark, the ceremonial boat that carried the god's statue during festivals. When a question was posed, the priest carrying the bark would allow the god to answer through the movement of the bark itself. If the bark moved forward, the answer was yes. If it moved backward or resisted movement, the answer was no. The priests claimed they were not controlling the movement, that the god was actually animating the bark through divine will. Modern skeptics might suspect trickery, and certainly there was potential for priests to manipulate the process to achieve desired outcomes. But the ancient Egyptians believed these oracles were genuine communications from the divine. And interestingly, there are recorded cases where oracles gave answers that went against the interests of the powerful, suggesting that the process was not always rigged. Another form of divination involved the interpretation of dreams. The Egyptians believed that dreams were messages from the gods, glimpses into the divine realm that could provide warnings, guidance, and prophecies. There were professional dream interpreters attached to temples, and dream books have survived that provide interpretations for various types of dreams. Some dreams were seen as direct communications from specific deities. If one dreamed of a god or goddess, it was understood as a divine visitation. Other dreams required more subtle interpretation. Dreaming of certain animals, objects, or actions could have symbolic meanings that needed to be decoded by experts. Negative dreams could be counteracted through ritual, including the recitation of protective spells and the creation of amulets based on the dream's content. There were also incubation rituals, where individuals would sleep in temples specifically to receive dream messages from the gods. The person seeking guidance would undergo purification rituals, make offerings, and then spend the night in a special chamber within the temple complex. The god would then appear in the person's dreams to provide the requested guidance or healing. These incubation chambers have been found in temples throughout Egypt, particularly in temples dedicated to healing deities like Imhotep and Amenhotep, son of Hapu. Magic and divination were intertwined in Egyptian thought. A magician was not someone who performed tricks or illusions, but someone who understood the hidden connections between things, who could manipulate the fabric of reality through knowledge of sacred names and ritual procedures. The most powerful magicians were priests who had access to the sacred texts, and who had undergone the necessary initiations to handle divine power. One category of magical practice involved sympathetic magic, the idea that like affects like. A small model of a person or animal could be used as a proxy for the real thing. Rituals performed on the model would affect the actual person or creature. This principle was used in both helpful and harmful ways. Healing rituals might involve creating a clay figure of the patient and performing curative rituals on it. Curse rituals might involve creating a figure of an enemy and subjecting it to symbolic destruction. Another important magical principle was the power of names. To know something's true name was to have power over it. This is why many gods and individuals had secret names that were never spoken aloud. The pharaoh's birth name was hidden, replaced by throne names specifically to protect him from magical attack. In one famous myth, Isis tricks Ra into revealing his secret name by creating a serpent that bites him, causing terrible pain. She offers to heal him only if he reveals his true name, which he then uses to gain divine power. The creation of magical texts involved specific materials and procedures. The ink had to be made from particular substances, sometimes including burned remains of sacred animals or plants. The papyrus or leather had to be ritually purified. The scribe had to be in a state of ritual purity and had to recite protective spells before beginning work. The finished text was not simply read, but was often ritually consumed, either by burning it and inhaling the smoke or by dissolving the ink in water and drinking it, literally internalizing the words of power. Let these words of power surround you now, not to control or compel, but simply to protect and to ease. Feel them settling around you like a gentle fog, obscuring all that is harsh and revealing only what is soft and restful. The Egyptian calendar was intimately connected to religious observance. The year was divided into 3 seasons based on the Nile's cycle: Akhet, the inundation, when the river flooded; Pere, the growing season; and Shemu, the harvest. Each season lasted 4 months, and each month consisted of 3 10-day weeks, with 5 additional days added at the end of the year. These 5 extra days were considered unlucky, a dangerous time when the boundaries between the ordered world and chaos grew thin. Nearly every day of the year had some religious significance. There were major festivals that lasted for days or even weeks, involving elaborate processions, abundant offerings, and public celebrations. There were also minor observances, days sacred to particular deities when specific offerings should be made or certain activities should be avoided. The Festival of the Valley was one of the most important annual celebrations. Held during the 2nd month of Pere, this festival honoured the dead and involved a procession of a moon statue from Karnak across the Nile to the West Bank, where the tombs were located. Families would gather at the tombs of their ancestors, bringing food, drink and flowers. They would spend the night at the tombs, feasting and celebrating, believing that the spirits of the dead would join them and partake of the offerings. This was not a sombre occasion, but a joyous one. The living and the dead were reunited, if only briefly. Music and dancing were important parts of the celebration. The Egyptians understood that death was a transformation, not an ending, and that maintaining connection with the ancestors was essential for the well-being of the living. Another major festival was the Wepet Renpe, the opening of the year, which coincided with the rising of the star Sirius just before dawn, an event that predicted the annual flooding of the Nile. This astronomical event was of crucial importance, as the flood brought the nutrient-rich silt that made Egyptian agriculture possible. The festival involved purification rituals, offerings to Hapi, the god of the Nile flood, and celebrations of renewal and rebirth. The Sed festival, or Heb-Sed, was a royal jubilee celebrated after a pharaoh had ruled for 30 years and then repeated every 3 years thereafter. This festival involved the ritual renewal of the pharaoh's power and vitality. The king would perform a ceremonial run around a marked course, demonstrating his continued physical ability to rule. He would also undergo a symbolic death and rebirth, temporarily laying aside the symbols of kingship before receiving them again from the gods, a ritual that renewed his divine authority. The beautiful festival of the Desert Valley involved another procession, this time to the mortuary temples on the West Bank. The god Amun would visit each of these temples, bringing blessings to the deceased pharaohs and reinforcing the connection between the living and the dead rulers. This festival emphasized continuity, the idea that past, present and future pharaohs formed an unbroken chain of divine kingship, stretching from the first king to the last. During festivals, the usually strict boundaries between sacred and profane space would blur. People who normally could not enter temple precincts would be allowed into the outer courtyards. The statue of the god, usually hidden in the sanctuary, would emerge into public view, though typically concealed within a portable shrine. The people could pose questions to the oracle, make special offerings, and receive blessings directly from the divine presence. These festivals were not just religious observances but also important economic and social events. They brought people together from across the region, facilitating trade, political alliances and social bonds. The temples would distribute food and beer to the crowds, sometimes in enormous quantities. Temple records speak of thousands of loaves of bread and hundreds of jars of beer being distributed during major festivals, ensuring that even the poorest citizens could participate in the celebration. Imagine yourself at such a festival, the air filled with the scent of incense and roasting meat, the sound of drums, rattles and singing echoing off temple walls, the crowd surging forward as the sacred bark appears, carried high on the shoulders of priests. For a moment you glimpse the shrine that houses the god, and you feel a presence, something vast and unknowable, benevolent and terrible at once. And then the moment passes, the procession moves on, and you're left with a sense of having touched something beyond the ordinary world. The Book of the Dead was not actually a single book, but rather a collection of spells that could be selected and customized based on what the deceased or their family could afford. The poorest might have only a few spells written on their coffin or on small amulets. The wealthy could afford elaborate papyrus scrolls, sometimes stretching over 30 feet in length, containing hundreds of spells with accompanying illustrations. Despite the name given to it by early Egyptologists, the ancient Egyptians called these texts the Book of Coming Forth by Day, a title that emphasized not death but emergence into new life. The spells were designed to protect the deceased, to provide them with knowledge they would need, to transform them into various beings with different powers, and to ensure they would be recognized by the gods as worthy of eternal life. Some spells provided practical information, like Spell 125, which contained the negative confession to be recited before the 42 judges. Other spells offered transformation, like those that would turn the deceased into a bird, a lotus flower, or a divine being. Spell 6 ensured that the Shabti figures buried with the deceased would animate and perform labour on their behalf. Spell 30b prevented the heart from testifying against the deceased during judgment. Spell 81 allowed the deceased to transform into a lotus flower, a symbol of rebirth. The spells were often accompanied by vignettes, illustrations that showed the spell being enacted. These images were not merely decorative but were themselves powerful magical elements. In Egyptian thought, an image of something could function as that thing. A picture of bread could nourish the deceased just as actual bread could. A depiction of the deceased making offerings ensured that offerings would always be available, even if the living stopped providing them. The creation of a Book of the Dead scroll was a significant undertaking. It required the services of skilled scribes who could write the hieroglyphic text with precision and accuracy. A single mistake could render a spell ineffective or even dangerous. The text also required artists who could create the vignettes, painting them with mineral pigments that would not fade, carbon black for black, ochre for red and yellow, powdered malachite for green, and azurite for blue. The finished scroll would be placed in the tomb, often positioned near the mummy, or placed within the coffin itself. In some cases, sections of the Book of the Dead were written directly on the walls of the tomb or on the inside of the coffin, ensuring that the deceased would always have access to these vital spells. Earlier versions of these funerary texts existed as well. The pyramid texts found inscribed on the walls of pyramids from the Old Kingdom are the oldest religious texts in the world. These spells were originally reserved for pharaohs, designed to ensure their ascension to the heavens where they would join the gods. The coffin texts, which appeared in the Middle Kingdom, democratized these spells to some degree, making them so available to nobles and wealthy commoners. By the New Kingdom, when the Book of the Dead proper emerged, funerary spells had become available to anyone who could afford them, reflecting a shift in Egyptian religious thought toward a more egalitarian view of the afterlife. The spells evolved over time, with new ones being added and old ones being modified or falling out of use. By the late period, there were standardized versions organized into chapters, though individual scrolls still showed considerable variation based on regional traditions and personal choices. Let the words of these ancient texts wash over you. They were meant to guide souls through darkness into light, through death into life. Let them guide you now, not through death, but through this threshold between waking and sleeping, carrying you gently into dreams. The goddesses of ancient Egypt were as powerful and diverse as the gods, and many of the most important rituals involve female deities. Isis, the great magician and mother goddess, was one of the most widely worshipped deities in the ancient world. Her cult spread far beyond Egypt, reaching throughout the Mediterranean and persisting long after the other Egyptian gods had been forgotten. Isis was the embodiment of devoted love and magical power. Her role in the Osiris myth made her a symbol of wifely devotion and motherly protection. She was invoked by women in childbirth, by mothers protecting their children, and by anyone seeking healing or magical assistance. Amulets depicting Isis nursing her son, Horus, were common protective charms, believed to channel the goddess's nurturing power to protect children from harm. Rituals dedicated to Isis often involved the use of milk, symbolizing maternal nourishment. Priestesses would pour libations of milk while reciting spells asking for the goddess's protection. Some rituals involved the knotting of cords, creating the Tayet, the knot of Isis, which represented the goddess's magical power to bind and protect. Hathor, the goddess of love, music and joy, was celebrated through festivals that involved ecstatic dancing and ritual drunkenness. The Festival of Drunkenness commemorated the myth in which Hathor, transformed into the raging Sekhmet, was about to destroy humanity. The gods managed to stop her by dyeing beer red to resemble blood and spreading it across the land. When Hathor drank the beer, thinking it was blood, she became drunk and fell asleep, forgetting her rage. The festival reenacted this myth, with participants drinking beer dyed red with pomegranate juice until they reached an altered state of consciousness, a ritual intoxication that was considered sacred. Sekhmet herself, the lioness goddess of war and disease, was both feared and venerated. She could send plagues, but could also cure them. Rituals to appease Sekhmet were performed regularly, especially during the dangerous days at the end of the year. These rituals involved offerings of food, incense, and particularly beer, recalling the myth of her pacification. Priests would recite litanies containing hundreds of names and epithets of the goddess, each one acknowledging a different aspect of her power and asking her to withhold her wrath. Bastet, who began as a fierce lioness goddess but later became associated with the domestic cat, was celebrated at Bubastis with a festival that attracted hundreds of thousands of pilgrims. The Greek historian Herodotus described this festival as one of the most important in Egypt, involving boat processions along the Nile, music, dancing, and massive quantities of wine consumed. The festival honoured the gentler aspects of feline divinity, celebrating joy, music, and domestic harmony. Neith, one of the oldest Egyptian goddesses, was associated with war, weaving, and creation. She was sometimes credited with creating the world through the power of her words, making her a female parallel to the creator god Ptah. Her temple at Say was one of the most important religious centres in Egypt, and her priestesses wielded considerable political influence. The Greeks identified Neith with Athena, recognising in her a similar combination of martial prowess and wisdom. Mut, consort of Amun, was the divine mother, often depicted wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Her name literally meant mother, and she represented the maternal aspect of kingship. The pharaoh was considered her son, and rituals involving Mut emphasized the divine origins of royal power and the protective role of the mother goddess in sustaining the kingdom. Nut, the sky goddess, was depicted as a woman arched over the earth, her body covered with stars. She swallowed the sun each evening and gave birth to it each morning, a daily cycle that represented the eternal renewal of life. The inside of many coffins was decorated with an image of Nut, placing the deceased within her protective embrace and ensuring their own rebirth just as she ensured the rebirth of the sun. Female deities were also associated with the 7 Hathors, a group of goddesses who appeared at the birth of a child to pronounce its fate. They could not be seen by mortal eyes, but their presence was acknowledged through rituals performed immediately after birth, rituals designed to ensure favourable pronouncements and protect the newborn from any negative destiny that might have been declared. The role of priestesses in these goddess cults was significant. While male priests dominated most religious institutions, certain goddess cults had female clergy who performed essential ritual functions. The priestesses of Hathor were musicians and dancers, skills that were integral to the worship of their goddess. The priestesses of Neith were weavers, echoing the goddess's creative power. Some priestesses achieved high status and political influence, particularly during periods when powerful queens emphasized the worship of female deities. Let the power of these goddesses surround you. Feel their protection, their nurturing care. You're held in the embrace of Nut, the sky goddess. You're protected by Isis, the great magician. You're cherished by Hathor, the lady of joy. All is well, and you are safe. The concept of the afterlife in ancient Egypt was complex and evolved over time. The earliest beliefs held that only the pharaoh would achieve eternal life, ascending to the sky to join the gods. Common people were thought to continue a shadowy existence in their tombs, dependent on offerings from the living for sustenance. Over time, this view democratized. By the Middle Kingdom, anyone who could afford proper burial and the necessary rituals could aspire to eternal life. The afterlife was imagined as a place called the Field of Reeds, a perfect version of Egypt where crops grew tall without effort, where the Nile always flooded at the right time, and where there was no hunger, thirst, or pain. But reaching the Field of Reeds was not automatic. The deceased had to navigate the dangerous journey through the Duat, passing through 12 gates, each guarded by fearsome demons. At each gate, the deceased had to know the correct passwords, the secret names of the gate and its guardians. This knowledge was provided by the Book of the Dead and other funerary texts, giving the deceased the information they needed to progress. The journey was also physical. The deceased had to have their body intact, which is why mummification was so important. They had to have their name preserved, which is why names were inscribed everywhere in tombs. They had to have food and drink, which is why offerings were left and why walls were decorated with images of food that would magically sustain them. The most crucial moment came in the Hall of Two Truths, where the heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Osiris presided over this judgment, seated on a throne with Isis and Nephthys standing beside him. The heart was placed on one side of a balance scale, the feather on the other. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, stood ready to record the result. Amit, the devourer, waited beneath the scales, ready to consume any heart that proved too heavy with sin. If the heart balanced with the feather, Osiris would welcome the deceased, declaring them Ma'keru, true of voice, justified. The deceased would then be led to the Field of Reeds, where they would be reunited with loved ones who had passed before and would live in eternal peace. But what if the deceased had lived a wicked life? What if their heart was heavy with sin? Then Amit would devour the heart, and the person would experience the second death, complete annihilation, ceasing to exist in any form. This was the ultimate fate to be avoided, worse than any punishment or suffering, to simply cease to be. Interestingly, the Egyptian afterlife was not entirely static. The deceased still had work to do, which is why they were buried with tools, and why Shabtis were included to serve as magical labourers. The deceased could also leave the tomb, emerging as a bat-bird during the day to visit the world of the living. They could partake of offerings left at their tomb, and could even interact with the living through dreams or omens. There was also a darker aspect to death. Those who died violent deaths, who were not properly buried, or who were cursed, could become dangerous spirits. These restless dead might haunt the living, causing illness or misfortune. Protective rituals and amulets were used to ward off such spirits, and offerings could be made to appease them and encourage them to rest peacefully. The Egyptians also believed in the possibility of death in the afterlife itself. If one did not properly maintain one's tomb, if offerings ceased, if one's name was forgotten, one could die again in the afterlife, this time permanently. This fear drove the creation of endowment funds to ensure perpetual offerings, the commissioning of K-priests whose sole job was to maintain offerings at a specific tomb, and the careful documentation of names to prevent them from being forgotten. This complex view of death and afterlife produced a culture deeply invested in memory and continuity. The monuments the Egyptians built, the text they inscribed, the rituals they performed were all designed to ensure that they would not be forgotten, that their names would endure, that they would achieve what they most desired, to live forever. Let yourself imagine this eternal existence, not working or striving, but simply being in a place of perfect contentment. The sun always warm but never too hot, the breeze always gentle, food always abundant, all pain gone, all worry released. This is the peace promised by the ancient texts, and it can be yours now, in this moment, as you surrender to sleep. The relationship between Egypt and death was not morbid or unhealthy. It was rather an acknowledgement of the central importance of death in the human experience, and a determination to meet death with preparation and dignity. The Egyptians did not fear death itself, but rather the possibility of being unprepared for it, of facing the journey to the afterlife without the necessary knowledge, protection, and provisions. This attitude produced what might seem paradoxical to modern observers, people who spent significant portions of their lives preparing for death, yet who also celebrated life with joy and vigour. Tomb paintings show not just funerary scenes, but also images of daily life, banquets, hunting, fishing, music, and dancing. These images served a dual purpose. They ensured that these activities would continue in the afterlife, but they also celebrated the goodness of earthly existence. The Egyptian view was that life and death were not opposites, but rather two phases of a continuous existence. Birth, life, death, and rebirth formed a cycle, mirroring the daily cycle of the sun, the annual cycle of the Nile, and the eternal cycles of the cosmos. To resist this cycle was futile. To prepare for it and embrace it was wisdom. This perspective allowed the Egyptians to approach death with a degree of equanimity that can seem strange to cultures that view death as purely negative. Yes, death was a separation from loved ones, a departure from familiar places and pleasures, but it was also a transformation, a promotion, a graduation to a higher state of being. The deceased became Ak, a glorified spirit with powers the living did not possess. The physical remains of this death-centered culture still dot the landscape of Egypt. The pyramids, the most recognizable symbols of ancient Egypt, were elaborate tombs, monuments designed to ensure the pharaoh's eternal survival. The Valley of the Kings, a desolate canyon in the hills west of Thebes, contains dozens of rock-cut tombs carved deep into the mountain. The temples, though designed for the worship of gods, were also connected to the funerary cults of deceased pharaohs. Modern visitors to these sites often report strange feelings, a sense of presence, a feeling that they are not entirely alone. Archaeologists working in tombs have described unusual occurrences. Tools moved from where they were left, unexplained sounds, sudden changes in temperature. Whether these are genuine paranormal phenomena, tricks of psychology, or simple coincidence, they testify to the powerful atmosphere these ancient sites still possess. The tombs were designed to last forever, and many have survived remarkably well. The dry climate of Egypt preserved organic materials that would have decayed elsewhere. We have the actual bodies of the pharaohs, looking much as they did thousands of years ago. We have food offerings so well preserved that we can identify the exact species of grain, or the type of meat. We have flowers left by mourners over 3,000 years ago, their colours faded but their forms intact. This preservation allows us to connect with these ancient people in a direct and intimate way. We can look at the face of Ramesses II and see the man who may have been the pharaoh of the Exodus. We can read the letters of ordinary people complaining about work conditions or expressing love for family members. We can see the games they played, the cosmetics they wore, the jewellery they treasured. What emerges from this evidence is a picture of people not so different from ourselves. They loved their children, mourned their dead, worried about the future, and hoped for something beyond the brief span of earthly life. The rituals they performed, elaborate and strange as they may seem, were expressions of these universal human concerns. The dark rituals we have explored tonight were dark only in the sense that they dealt with death and the unknown. But they were also filled with hope, with the conviction that death could be defeated, that love could transcend the grave, that meaning and order could be found even in the face of the universe's greatest mystery. As we near the end of our journey through ancient Egypt's sacred rituals, let us consider what these practices meant to those who performed them. For the priests who spent decades learning the sacred texts, the rituals were not empty gestures but powerful acts that maintained the cosmic order. For the embalmers who carefully preserved bodies, their work was holy service, ensuring that the deceased would have the physical form necessary for eternal life. For the family members who commissioned funerary texts and tomb decorations, these were expressions of love, gifts given to the deceased to ease their journey and ensure their comfort in the afterlife. For the common people who participated in festivals, who brought offerings to temples, who wore protective amulets, the rituals provided structure, meaning, and hope in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable. The Egyptian civilization lasted over 3,000 years, an almost incomprehensible span of time. During those millennia, empires rose and fell, languages changed, technologies advanced. Yet the core rituals remained remarkably consistent. The opening of the mouth ceremony performed in the Old Kingdom was essentially the same as that performed in the late period 2,000 years later. This continuity speaks to the deep importance these practices held for the Egyptian people. When we look at Egyptian art with its formal poses and standardized representations, it can seem alien and distant. But if we look more closely, we see touches of individuality and humanity. A sculpture of a husband and wife, their arms around each other, conveying affection across the millennia. A painting of children playing, their joy evident despite the stylized form. A letter from a widower to his deceased wife, asking her to stop haunting him because he is remarried and wants to move on with his life. These glimpses of personality remind us that behind the magnificent monuments and elaborate rituals were individual human beings with hopes, fears, joys and sorrows much like our own. They lived in a different time, held different beliefs, followed different customs. But they were fundamentally human, driven by the same basic needs and desires that drive us today. The rituals we have discussed tonight, the mummification ceremonies, the opening of the mouth, the weighing of the heart, the temple services, the magical spells, were all attempts to address the fundamental questions of human existence. Why are we here? What happens when we die? Is there meaning to our lives? Can we transcend our mortality? Different cultures answer these questions in different ways, but the questions themselves are universal. The ancient Egyptians developed answers that satisfied them for thousands of years, that gave them comfort in the face of death and meaning in the midst of life. We may not share their specific beliefs, but we can appreciate the profound human impulse that motivated them. As you lie here in the darkness, on the edge of sleep, you are engaging in your own nightly ritual, one that humans have practiced since the dawn of consciousness. Sleep is a small death, a temporary departure from the waking world. Each night we close our eyes not knowing with certainty that we will open them again, yet we trust in the natural order, in the cycle that has repeated itself countless times before. The ancient Egyptians understood sleep as a rehearsal for death. Each night the soul left the body wandering in the world of dreams, facing challenges and dangers. Each morning it returned, and the person awoke renewed, reborn. This daily cycle of sleep and waking mirrored the greater cycle of death and resurrection. As you drift deeper into sleep, you are participating in this ancient pattern. Your conscious mind retreats, and your dreaming mind emerges. You journey to strange landscapes, meet people who may or may not exist, experience events that follow dream logic rather than waking reason. And when you wake, you will return, bringing with you only fragmentary memories of where you have been. The Egyptians would have said you are travelling through your own personal duat, facing your own trials and challenges. The dreams you have are messages, either from your own deeper self or from the realm of the divine. When you wake, you will have been transformed, however subtly, by your night's journey. So, let yourself go now. Release your hold on the waking world. Trust in the cycle that has sustained humanity since the beginning. You will return when it is time. For now, simply drift, float, surrender to the gentle current that carries all sleepers into the realm of dreams. The sound of the Nile fades in the distance. The torch lights in the temple grow dim. The priests complete their evening rituals and withdraw, leaving the gods to their rest. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, the same stars that shone on the pyramids when they were new, the same stars that guided the ancient astronomers in their calculations, the same stars that will shine long after we all have become dust. In the Valley of the Kings, the tombs lie silent and still. The pharaohs rest in their sarcophagi, preserved by the dry desert air, awaiting a resurrection that may never come in the form they imagined. Or perhaps they have already achieved it, transformed into something beyond our understanding, dwelling in a dimension we cannot perceive. The temples stand empty now, their rituals long abandoned, their gods no longer worshipped, but the stones remember. The hieroglyphs still proclaim the glory of the gods and the eternal nature of the divine order. The relief carvings still show the endless cycle of offerings and blessings, frozen in stone, continuing forever in artistic form even though they have ceased in physical practice. And perhaps, in some way we cannot fully comprehend, the rituals do continue. Perhaps every time someone reads the ancient texts, the words come alive again. Perhaps every time someone visits the temples, the gods awaken for a moment. Perhaps every time someone learns about these ancient beliefs, some small part of that 3,000-year-old civilization is resurrected. Memory is its own form of immortality. The Egyptians understood this. They built in stone because stone endures. They inscribed their names everywhere because to be named is to exist. They created art and literature and architecture that would outlast them by millennia. And in doing so, they achieved a kind of eternal life. We speak their names, we study their works, we remember them, and in remembering we keep them alive. You too will be remembered by someone. The impact you have made on the world, however small it may seem, ripples outward in ways you cannot imagine. The kindness you showed, someone might have changed their life. The work you did might inspire others. The love you gave might echo through generations. You are part of the great chain of human existence, connected to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. This thought can be comforting as you prepare for sleep. You are not alone. You are part of something vast and ancient, a story that began long before you were born and will continue long after you're gone. Your brief appearance in this story matters. Your life has meaning. And when you finally do depart this world, you will leave behind traces, memories, influences that will persist. But for now, you do not need to think about such distant matters. For now, you need only sleep. Let the day's concerns fade away. Let tomorrow's worries remain tomorrow's. This moment, this breath, this peaceful darkness is all that exists. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be, no one you need to please. The rituals are complete. The offerings have been made. The prayers have been said. The gates of the underworld stand open, but they are not threatening. They are welcoming, inviting you to enter the realm of dreams, where all things are possible and nothing is as it seems. Cross the threshold now. Step out of the waking world and into the world of sleep. Trust that you will be protected on this journey, as the ancient Egyptians trusted in their gods and their rituals. Trust that morning will come, as surely as Ra rises each dawn. Trust in the cycle, the pattern, the eternal return. Your breathing has slowed, your body has relaxed, your mind has grown quiet. The border between waking and sleeping has become thin and permeable. You're crossing over now gently, peacefully, without resistance. The last thoughts drift away like boats on the Nile, floating downstream into the darkness. The last tensions dissolve like salt in water, dispersing until nothing remains but peace. You are weightless, formless, pure consciousness without boundary or limitation, and now you are asleep, dreaming dreams that will be forgotten by morning, travelling through your own personal afterlife, dying the small death that ensures you will wake renewed. Rest well, traveller. Rest deeply. The dawn is still hours away, and you have all the time in the world to explore the mysteries that await in the realm of sleep. The ancient Egyptians bid you farewell with their traditional blessing. May your name endure. May your soul live forever. May you wake to see the sun rise in the east. May you be renewed as Ra is renewed. In the darkness of the tomb, there are secrets still waiting to be discovered. The sands of Egypt hold countless mysteries, chambers that have not been opened in thousands of years, texts that have not been read, names that have been forgotten. Each grain of sand covering these ancient sites represents a moment in time, a breath taken by someone who lived and loved and hoped, just as you do now. The archaeologists continue their work, carefully brushing away the sand, documenting every fragment of pottery, every scrap of papyrus, every carved inscription. They work in the heat of the day, when the desert sun beats down mercilessly. They work in the cool of the evening, when shadows grow long and the ancient stones seem to whisper their secrets. And sometimes, late at night, when the dig site is quiet and still, they might feel a presence, a sense that they are not alone, that the spirits of those who created these monuments still linger, watching, waiting, remembering. There is a tomb that was discovered only recently, its entrance hidden beneath centuries of accumulated debris. When the archaeologists finally broke through the sealed doorway, they found themselves in a small antechamber, its walls covered with hieroglyphs that glowed in the beam of their flashlights. The air was thick and still, undisturbed for over 3,000 years. On the floor lay scattered offerings, dried lotus flowers, ceramic vessels still containing traces of ancient wine, wooden figurines of servants and animals, all placed there by loving hands on the day the tomb was sealed. In the main burial chamber, they found a sarcophagus, its painted surface remarkably well preserved. The face painted on the coffin looked out at them with serene confidence, the eyes outlined in black coal, the expression peaceful and assured. This was someone who had believed completely in the promises of the afterlife, who had faced death without fear, who had trusted in the rituals and the spells and the divine protection. When they carefully opened the sarcophagus, they found the mummy inside, wrapped in layer upon layer of linen just as we have described. Between the layers were dozens of amulets, each one carefully positioned according to the instructions in the funerary texts. There was a scarab over the heart, a jed pillar at the spine, an eye of Horus at the throat. The wrappings themselves were inscribed with spells in cursive hieratic script, every inch of fabric covered with prayers and protective formulas. This person, whose name was Amenhotep, was not a pharaoh or a high noble. He was a scribe, a middle-class official who had worked in the temple administration. He had spent his life copying texts, recording offerings, maintaining the accounts that kept the great temple complexes running, and he had saved his money year after year so that when his time came, he could afford a proper burial, a tomb of his own, and all the necessary provisions for the afterlife. His tomb included a papyrus containing his personal Book of the Dead, customized with his name inserted into each spell. There was also a biography, a brief text that told his story in his own words. He wrote of his family, his wife Mutnofret, and his 3 children. He wrote of his devotion to Thoth, the god of scribes and wisdom. He wrote of his hope that his name would be remembered, that offerings would be made at his tomb, that he would live again in the field of reeds. 3,000 years later, his wish has been granted. His name is spoken again. His story is told. In a very real sense, Amenhotep lives, his car sustained not by physical offerings, but by the act of remembrance, by the fact that someone, somewhere, knows his name and honours his memory. Let this thought comfort you as you drift deeper into sleep. Your name too will be remembered. Your story too will matter. You're part of this great chain of human existence, linked to Amenhotep, and to all those who came before and all those who will come after. Sleep now, knowing that you are connected to something vast and eternal. The Book of the Dead contained many spells, but there were some that were considered especially powerful, especially essential. Spell 7 allowed the deceased to travel freely, to move between the world of the living and the world of the dead without restriction. The spell read, "I am yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I have the power to be born a second time. I am the divine hidden soul who creates the gods." These words were not meant to be understood literally, but rather as mystical formulas that tapped into the fundamental forces of the cosmos. By identifying with yesterday, today, and tomorrow, the deceased was claiming a place in the eternal flow of time, asserting that they were not bound by the normal limits of mortal existence. By claiming to create the gods, they were asserting their own divine nature, their right to exist alongside the immortal powers. Spell 15 was a hymn to Ra, the sun god, meant to be recited at dawn. Even in death, the Egyptians maintained their connection to the daily cycle of the sun. Each morning, as Ra emerged from the underworld where he had battled the serpent Apophis during the night, the deceased would sing praises to him, celebrating his victory, drawing strength from his triumph over darkness and chaos. The hymn spoke of Ra's beauty, his power, his glory. It described how the gods rejoiced at his rising, how the whole creation sang his praises, and in singing this hymn, the deceased identified themselves with Ra, participating in his victory, ensuring their own resurrection just as the sun was resurrected each day. Spell 17 was longer and more complex, a cosmological text that explained the nature of creation and the relationship between the gods and the cosmos. It began with questions. Who is he? What does this mean? And then it provided answers, revealing the hidden meanings behind the myths, explaining the symbolism embedded in religious imagery. This spell served as a kind of catechism, ensuring that the deceased understood the deeper truths of their religion. It was not enough to simply perform rituals by rote. One had to understand, to truly comprehend the divine mysteries. Knowledge was power in the afterlife, and this spell provided essential knowledge. Spell 30b, as we mentioned earlier, was crucial for the judgment scene. It was addressed to the heart itself. O my heart of my mother, O my heart of my different ages, do not stand up as a witness against me, do not be opposed to me in the tribunal, do not be hostile to me in the presence of the keeper of the balance. The spell recognized that the heart contained all memories, all knowledge of one's deeds, both good and evil. It was asking the heart, pleading with it really, not to reveal anything that might tip the scales toward condemnation. This might seem like an attempt to cheat, to hide one's sins. But the Egyptians saw it differently. They believed that a person's intention mattered as much as their actions. If one had tried to live according to Ma'at, even if one had sometimes failed, the heart should not betray that fundamental goodness of intention. Spell 72 allowed the deceased to go forth by day, to leave the tomb and experience the world of the living. This was one of the most desired abilities, the power to walk again in the sunlight, to visit loved ones, to see the beauty of Egypt once more. The spell promised, I open the doors of heaven, I throw open the portals of earth. I have made all paths available to me. I have power in my legs, I have strength in my arms. The image of the bay bird, the human-headed bird that represented the personality, was closely connected to this spell. The bay could fly out of the tomb at will, soaring over the Nile, visiting familiar places, watching over descendants. This was why tomb paintings often showed the bay perched near the entrance to the tomb, ready to take flight. Spell 89 gave the deceased the power to reunite with their body. Let my soul come to me from wherever it may be. Let it be brought to me, for I am the power that is great among the gods. I am the chosen one of millions. I have come forth from the primeval water. This spell addressed one of the great fears of the Egyptian afterlife, that the different parts of the soul might become separated and unable to reunite. If the Ka-Bear and body could not come together, the person could not achieve full resurrection. This spell ensured that reunion would occur, that all the scattered parts would find each other and become whole again. Feel your own wholeness now, all the parts of yourself, body, mind, spirit, coming together in this moment of rest. Nothing is scattered, nothing is lost. You are complete, you are safe, you are at peace. The practice of magic in ancient Egypt was not limited to priests and trained specialists. Ordinary people also performed magical rituals, usually for practical purposes like healing illness, protecting children, or ensuring success in love or business. These folk magic practices coexisted with the official temple religion, forming a rich and complex magical tradition. Magical papyri that have survived contain spells for every conceivable purpose. There were spells to cure scorpion stings, snake bites, and crocodile attacks. There were spells to ease childbirth, to stop bleeding, to reduce fever. There were spells to make oneself invisible, to win at games of chance, to gain the favour of authorities. Some spells were simple, requiring only the recitation of a formula. Others were elaborate, involving complex preparations and specific materials. One healing spell, for example, required the practitioner to draw an image of the demon causing the illness on a piece of linen, then burn the linen while reciting the spell. The smoke would carry the demon away, and the patient would recover. Love spells were particularly common, ranging from gentle charms designed to attract a potential partner to more aggressive spells that were essentially magical coercion. One such spell instructed the practitioner to create a wax figurine of the desired person, then heat the figurine over a flame while reciting, I burn your heart, I burn your liver, I burn your every limb, until you come to me, until you do everything I say. These more aggressive spells troubled modern scholars, as they seemed to violate the ethical principles embodied in Ma'at. But the Egyptians apparently saw a distinction between using magic to harm someone unprovoked and using magic to achieve something one desired. The latter was considered acceptable, even if it involved some degree of coercion. Protection spells for children were especially important, as infant and child mortality rates were high in the ancient world. Parents would use every magical means at their disposal to keep their children safe. They would tie amulets around a child's neck, paint protective symbols on walls, recite spells over food and drink, and perform regular purification rituals. One protective ritual involved creating a magical boundary around a child's bed. The parent would walk around the bed holding a magical wand carved from hippopotamus ivory, drawing an invisible circle of protection. As they walked, they would recite, "Away from him, you who come in darkness, you who creep in, your face behind you, you who have forgotten what you came for. Away from him, come not to seize him, do not spit your poison against him, let him not fall into your trap." The spell addressed all the various threats that might harm a child: disease demons, evil spirits, snakes, scorpions, and the ever-present danger of the evil eye, the malevolent gaze of jealous or envious people that could bring misfortune. The concept of the evil eye was taken very seriously. It was believed that certain people, often without meaning to, could cause harm simply by looking at someone with envy or admiration. A beautiful child was especially vulnerable, which is why parents would sometimes deliberately make their children appear less attractive, applying mud to their faces or dressing them in ragged clothing to avoid attracting unwanted attention. To counteract the evil eye, people wore amulets in the shape of an eye, usually the Eye of Horus, the Wedged Eye. This sacred eye had its own mythology. In the battle between Horus and Set, Set tore out Horus's eye. The god Thoth restored it through magic, making it whole again. The restored eye became a symbol of healing, protection, and wholeness. Wearing an image of this eye was believed to deflect any harmful glances and restore whatever had been damaged. Let your own eyes close now. Let them rest. You need not watch, need not guard, need not protect. You are safe. Let sleep restore you, just as Thoth restored the Eye of Horus, making you whole and renewed. The Valley of the Kings is a landscape of desolation, a place of barren rock and merciless sun. Yet it holds within it some of the most magnificent tombs ever created, monuments to the Egyptian belief in eternal life. For 500 years, from the beginning of the New Kingdom around 1500 BCE until its end around 1000 BCE, pharaohs chose this hidden valley as their burial place. The valley was chosen for its remoteness and its natural pyramid shape, formed by the peak of Al-Qurn, a mountain that looms over the valley like a natural pyramid. The pharaohs hoped that by hiding their tombs in this desolate place, they could avoid the fate of earlier pyramids, which had been plundered despite all efforts to protect them. But the valley had another advantage. Its geological structure, layers of limestone alternating with softer rock, made it relatively easy to cut deep tombs into the mountain. Workers could excavate downward and horizontally, creating elaborate underground palaces with multiple chambers, corridors, and halls. The process of creating a royal tomb began as soon as a new pharaoh took the throne. Teams of skilled workers, the same ones who had worked on the previous pharaoh's tomb, would move to a new location in the valley and begin cutting into the rock. They worked in shifts, by the light of oil lamps, breathing air thick with rock dust, chipping away at the stone with copper and later bronze tools. The tomb was not just excavated, but also decorated. Artists would smooth the rough stone walls, cover them with a layer of plaster, and then paint elaborate scenes and texts. The quality of these paintings is extraordinary, the colours still vibrant after more than 3,000 years. Blues made from powdered lapis lazuli, reds from ochre, yellows from orpiment, greens from malachite, blacks from carbon, whites from gypsum. The scenes depicted in these tombs tell a story, the story of the pharaoh's journey through the afterlife. The walls are covered with texts from the Book of the Dead, from the Amduat, the book describing the 12 hours of the night, from the Book of Gates, which details the gates the deceased must pass through, and from other funerary literature. These texts were not meant to be read by the living. They were for the pharaoh alone, a guide to help him navigate the dangers of the underworld. The very act of writing them on the walls activated their power, ensuring that the pharaoh would have this knowledge when he needed it. One of the most complete of these royal tombs is that of Seti I, father of Rameses II. Seti's tomb descends deep into the mountain, with corridors and chambers extending for over 400 feet. The decorations are among the finest in any Egyptian tomb, the hieroglyphs carved in exquisite detail, the figures painted with delicate precision. In the burial chamber, the ceiling is decorated with astronomical scenes, showing the constellations, the planets, and the path of the sun through the sky. This ceiling effectively made the burial chamber into a model of the cosmos itself, placing the pharaoh at the centre of the universe, ensuring that he would be in harmony with the celestial order for all eternity. The sarcophagus that held Seti's mummy was carved from a single block of translucent alabaster. It was decorated inside and out with texts and images, including a complete version of the Book of Gates. When lit from within, the alabaster would glow with a warm light, transforming the sarcophagus into a vessel of divine radiance. Sadly, like most of the royal tombs, Seti's was plundered in ancient times. The mummy was removed from its sarcophagus and hidden by priests in a cache with other royal mummies to protect them from further desecration. The treasure that had been buried with him, the gold, the precious stones, the elaborate furniture, was stolen, melted down, or lost. Only one royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings escaped significant plunder, that of Tutankhamun, a minor pharaoh who ruled for less than 10 years and died while still a teenager. His tomb was small, probably not originally intended for royal burial. But because it was small, and because its entrance was later buried beneath debris from the excavation of another tomb, it remained hidden and mostly intact until its discovery in 1922. The treasures found in Tutankhamun's tomb gave the world a glimpse of the incredible wealth that had been buried with the pharaohs. The famous golden death mask, the throne inlaid with precious stones, the chariots, the beds, the clothing, the jewellery, the weapons, the games, the food offerings sealed in jars. All of this had been placed in the tomb to ensure the young pharaoh's comfort in the afterlife. But even more moving than the gold were the personal items. The lock of hair from his grandmother, the flowers placed on the coffin by his young widow, the staff he had used as a child, the board games he had played. These intimate objects remind us that behind the golden mask was a real person, a young man who had lived and died, who had been loved and mourned. Let yourself drift now through these ancient corridors, these painted chambers. You are safe here in the darkness. The images on the walls glow faintly, guiding you deeper, deeper into the mountain, into the heart of eternal night. And there, at the centre, you find rest, you find peace, you find the sleep that restores and renews. The workmen who built the royal tombs lived in a special village now known as Deir el-Medina, isolated from the rest of Egyptian society. This was necessary because these workers knew the locations of the tombs and the secrets of their construction. They were well paid and well treated, receiving generous rations of food, beer and oil. They had their own administrators, their own courts, their own religious festivals. The village has provided archaeologists with an extraordinary wealth of information about daily life in ancient Egypt. Unlike the grand temples and tombs, which tell us about religious beliefs and royal power, the remains from Deir el-Medina tell us about ordinary people, what they ate, what they wore, what they worried about, how they entertained themselves. We have their letters, written on ostraca, broken pieces of pottery or limestone that served as scratch paper. These letters reveal a world of very human concerns. A worker writes to his son, complaining that the young man is lazy and needs to work harder. A wife writes to her husband, asking him to bring home more vegetables from the market. A man writes to his superior, explaining why he was absent from work. His wife was ill, his donkey had died, he had to perform funerary rites for his mother. These letters also reveal the workers' deep engagement with religion and magic. They wrote prayers to the gods seeking help with problems. They consulted oracles to resolve disputes. They performed magical rituals to cure illnesses or protect their homes. Religion was not something separate from daily life, but was woven into every aspect of existence. The workers of Deir el-Medina built their own tombs, smaller and simpler than the royal tombs they worked on, but decorated with similar care. These tombs show scenes of daily life, of banquets and harvests, of fishing and hunting. They show the deceased making offerings to the gods, being led into the presence of Osiris, being welcomed into the afterlife. One particularly charming scene from a Deir el-Medina tomb shows the deceased and his wife sitting together under a tree playing a board game. This scene captures a moment of marital contentment, a simple pleasure that the deceased hoped to enjoy for eternity. It reminds us that the Egyptian vision of the afterlife was not some abstract spiritual realm, but rather a continuation of earthly life, with all its simple joys preserved and perfected. The workers also left behind poems and love songs, scratched onto pottery shards or written on scraps of papyrus. These poems are surprisingly modern in their sentiments, expressing the same emotions that people feel today: the joy of new love, the pain of separation, the longing for a beloved who is far away. One poem reads, "My heart remembers your love. One half of my heart is in your house. The other half is yours wherever you go. Come back to me soon, like a horse racing home. like a bird flying to its nest. My heart will not be whole until you return. These words, written over 3,000 years ago, express feelings that are timeless and universal. Love, longing, the desire for union with another person. These are human constants, connecting us across the vast gulf of time to these ancient people. Feel that connection now. You're not alone in your humanity. Every person who has ever lived has felt what you feel, has hoped what you hope, has feared what you fear. You are part of this great family of humanity, stretching back into the mists of prehistory and forward into an unknowable future. Rest in this knowledge. Let it comfort you. You belong. You are home. The Egyptian concept of time was fundamentally different from our modern understanding. We think of time as linear, as an arrow moving from past through present into future. The Egyptians saw time as cyclical, as an eternal return, with the same patterns repeating endlessly. This cyclical view was rooted in their observation of nature. The sun rose and set each day, following an unchanging pattern. The Nile flooded each year at the same time, bringing the same gifts of water and silt. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, marking the seasons with perfect regularity. The Egyptians believed that if they maintained Ma'at, if they performed the necessary rituals, if they upheld the cosmic order, then this beneficial cycle would continue forever. The sun would always rise, the Nile would always flood, life would always triumph over death. This was not blind optimism, but rather a profound confidence in the fundamental structure of reality. Their word for eternity, nehe, referred specifically to this cyclical time, this endless repetition of patterns. But they had another word, jet, which referred to unchanging static eternity, the kind of permanence embodied in stone monuments. A person who achieved eternal life would participate in both kinds of eternity, the dynamic, changing eternity of the cycles and the static, unchanging eternity of the divine realm. This concept of time affected how the Egyptians viewed their own lives. Life was not a one-time journey from birth to death, but rather part of a larger cycle that included pre-birth, life, death, afterlife, and eventual rebirth. Some Egyptians may have believed in reincarnation, in the possibility of returning to earthly life in a new form, though the evidence for this belief is ambiguous. What is clear is that they did not see death as a final ending. Death was a transition, a transformation, a necessary stage in the cycle. Just as day must end for night to come, and night must end for day to return, so life must end for afterlife to begin, and perhaps afterlife must end for new life to emerge. This cyclical view of time produced a culture that was remarkably conservative in some ways, and yet also deeply concerned with renewal and regeneration. The forms of art, architecture, and ritual changed very slowly, maintaining continuity across thousands of years. Yet these unchanging forms embodied ideas about renewal, about the constant regeneration of life from death. The Egyptians decorated their temples and tombs with images of the sun's journey through the underworld, a journey that ended each night with the sun's death, and began each morning with its resurrection. They were not just depicting a myth, but were participating in it, ensuring through their rituals and their art that the cycle would continue, that death would always give way to life. In your own life, you participate in these cycles, though perhaps you do not always notice them. Each night you sleep and each morning you wake, a small death and resurrection. Each year you mark the passage of seasons, the world dying in winter and being reborn in spring. Each breath you take is a cycle, an inhalation followed by an exhalation, a taking in and a letting go. Rest now in the rhythm of these cycles. Breathe in, breathe out. Day follows night, night follows day. Sleep comes, and then waking returns. Trust in the pattern, trust in the cycle. All is as it should be. Among the most enigmatic aspects of Egyptian religion were the animal cults, the worship of specific animals as living manifestations of the gods. Bulls, cats, ibises, crocodiles, baboons, and many other creatures were kept in temples, fed and cared for as if they were gods themselves. When these sacred animals died, they were mummified and buried with ceremony, sometimes in elaborate underground catacombs that contained thousands of animal mummies. The Apis bull was perhaps the most important of these sacred animals. This bull was believed to be the living manifestation of the god Ptah, the creator god of Memphis. Only one bull at a time could be the Apis bull, chosen by specific markings, a black body with white markings on the forehead, neck, and tail. When an Apis bull died, all of Egypt mourned, and priests searched throughout the land for the new bull that would be the next incarnation of the god. The Apis bull lived in luxury at the temple, fed the finest foods, attended by priests, visited by pilgrims who came to receive the god's blessing. When the bull died, it was mummified with the same care given to a pharaoh. Its internal organs were removed and placed in canopic jars. Its body was wrapped in linen and covered with amulets. It was placed in a massive stone sarcophagus, sometimes weighing over 60 tons, and interred in the Serapeum, an underground complex of tunnels and chambers carved from solid rock. The Serapeum contained dozens of these enormous sarcophagi, each one holding the mummy of an Apis bull. Walking through these tunnels today, one cannot help but be awed by the dedication and labour required to create such monuments for animals. Yet to the Egyptians, these were not merely animals, but divine beings, worthy of the same honours given to gods and kings. Cats were also sacred, particularly to the goddess Bastet. Thousands of cat mummies have been found at Bubastis, Bastet's cult centre. These cats were not family pets that died, and were mummified by grieving owners, though some may have been. Many were raised specifically for ritual purposes, kept in the temple precincts, and then killed and mummified as offerings to the goddess. This practice might seem cruel to modern sensibilities, but the Egyptians saw it differently. By mummifying a cat and offering it to Bastet, a person was giving the goddess a permanent servant in the afterlife. The cat's spirit would serve the goddess forever, and the person who made the offering would receive the goddess's favour in return. Ibises, sacred to Thoth, were mummified by the millions. At Saqqara, underground galleries contain literally millions of ibis mummies, stacked in neat rows, each one carefully wrapped and sealed in a pottery vessel. The scale of this practice is almost incomprehensible. For centuries, thousands of ibises were bred, raised, killed, and mummified each year as offerings to the god of wisdom. Crocodiles, sacred to the god Sobek, were kept in temple pools where they were fed and worshipped. Some of these crocodiles grew to enormous size, living long lives under the care of priests. When they died, the largest and most impressive were mummified and buried with honour. Some crocodile mummies are over 15 feet long, representing animals that must have been genuinely terrifying in life. Even smaller creatures were mummified: snakes, fish, beetles, shrews, and falcons. Each animal was associated with a particular deity and served as a messenger between the human and divine realms. By mummifying these creatures, the Egyptians were creating permanent connections to the gods, ensuring that their prayers and offerings would be received. The animal cults puzzled ancient Greek and Roman observers who found the Egyptian veneration of animals strange and even comical. But to the Egyptians, animals were manifestations of divine power, creatures that participated in the sacred order of creation. Animals did not sin, did not violate Ma'at, did not act from malice or greed. They simply existed as the gods had created them, perfect in their nature. Let yourself relax into that same natural perfection. You do not need to strive, to improve, to become something other than what you are. Simply exist as you were created to exist, perfect in this moment. Breathe, rest, be. The sound of your breath is like the wind blowing across the desert, like the water lapping at the banks of the Nile, like the gentle rustle of papyrus reeds swaying in the breeze. Natural sounds, soothing sounds, sounds that have been heard by humans for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians who lived along the Nile heard these same sounds. They heard the call of ibises at dawn, the croaking of frogs at twilight, the splash of fish jumping in the river. They heard the voices of neighbours calling to each other across the water, the laughter of children playing in the mud, the songs of workers bringing in the harvest. These sounds filled their world, just as sounds fill yours. But in the quiet of the night, when most people slept, the sounds would fade to a gentle murmur, a background whisper that did not disturb rest, but rather supported it, reminding sleepers that the world continued, that life went on, that all was well. In the temples, priests maintained an eternal vigil, ensuring that the rituals were performed at the correct times, that the gods were honoured, that cosmic order was maintained, but even they would sometimes pause in their duties standing in the temple courtyards under the stars, looking up at the same constellations that you can see tonight if you look up at the sky. They saw the constellation they called Meskhetiu, the foreleg of an ox, which we know as the Big Dipper. They saw Sar, the constellation associated with Osiris, which we call Orion. They saw Sopdet, the star that predicted the Nile flood, which we call Sirius. These stars were not distant suns to them, but divine beings, gods and goddesses, whose movements through the sky had profound significance. The priests knew exactly when each star would rise, when each planet would appear, when the moon would wax and wane. They calculated eclipses, predicted conjunctions, mapped the heavens with impressive accuracy. Astronomy and religion were inseparable, for the movements of celestial bodies were manifestations of divine will. When you look at the night sky, you are looking at eternity. The light from those stars has travelled for years, sometimes for thousands of years, to reach your eyes. Some of the stars you see may no longer exist, having burned out long ago, but their light continues to travel through space, reaching you now in this moment. The Egyptians understood this connection between earth and sky. They built their monuments to align with celestial events. The Great Pyramid aligns almost perfectly with true north. Temple entrances were oriented so that on certain days, sunlight would penetrate deep into the sanctuary, illuminating the statue of the god. The ceiling of burial chambers were painted with stars, making the tomb into a microcosm of the heavens. Above and below, heaven and earth, life and death, all were connected in a great web of correspondences. What happened in the heavens affected what happened on earth. What happened in the human realm affected the divine realm. The rituals performed by priests on earth sustained the gods in heaven. The gods in heaven, in turn, sustained the order and stability of the earthly realm. You're part of this web, connected to everything around you, connected to the earth beneath you and the sky above you, connected to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. These connections are invisible, but real, threads of influence and relationship that bind all existence into a unified whole. Rest in this knowledge of connection. You're not isolated, not alone, not separate. You're woven into the fabric of reality, an essential thread in the great tapestry of existence. And in your rest, in your sleep, you contribute to the cosmic harmony, just as every creature that sleeps, every plant that closes its flowers for the night, every wave that gently laps the shore, contributes to the great rhythm, the eternal dance of existence. The ancient Egyptians knew this. They knew that sleep was not just a biological necessity, but a sacred act, a participation in the nightly death and resurrection of the sun god. When you sleep, you reenact that divine drama. You descend into the underworld of dreams. You face your own fears and challenges, and when you wake, you're resurrected, renewed, ready to face another day. But that resurrection is still hours away. For now there is only the descent, the gentle sinking into darkness, the release of conscious control. Let yourself go. Trust that you will return. Trust in the pattern that has repeated itself every night since the beginning of time. Trust in the cycle. In the deep desert, far from the Nile, there are places where no one goes, where the sand stretches unbroken to the horizon, where the silence is absolute. In these places, the ancient Egyptians believed the boundaries between worlds grew thin. These were liminal spaces, neither fully part of the ordered world of Egypt nor fully part of the chaos beyond. Desert hermits and mystics would sometimes go to these places seeking visions, seeking direct contact with the divine. They would fast and meditate, exposing themselves to the harsh sun and the cold nights, pushing their bodies to the limit until consciousness itself became altered, until the veil between mortal awareness and divine understanding dissolved. In these extreme states they reported visions of gods and demons, of secret knowledge revealed, of mysteries explained. Whether these visions were genuine spiritual experiences or hallucinations brought on by dehydration and exposure, we cannot say. But to those who experienced them, they were utterly real, utterly transformative. Some of these mystics claimed to have visited the afterlife while still living, to have journeyed through the Duat and returned with knowledge of what awaited there. They spoke of gardens more beautiful than any earthly paradise, of rivers flowing with crystal water, of fruits that never spoiled, and bread that never grew stale. They spoke of being reunited with loved ones, of conversations with the ancestors, of wisdom shared by those who had gone before. These accounts reassured the living that death was not to be feared, that the promises of the funerary texts were true, that those who lived according to Ma'at would indeed find peace and joy in the world beyond. The mystics became living proof of the afterlife's reality, bridges between the seen and the unseen. But not all their visions were comforting. Some spoke of souls who had failed the judgment, who wandered in outer darkness, denied entrance to the field of reeds. They described the hunger and thirst of these lost spirits, their endless searching for something they could never find. These cautionary tales reinforced the importance of living righteously, of preparing properly for death, of maintaining the rituals and offerings that sustained both the living and the dead. In the desert caves, archaeologists have found evidence of these hermits, simple shelters scraped into the rock, prayer sticks carved with divine names, offerings left for desert spirits. These were people who had chosen to step outside normal society, to dedicate themselves entirely to spiritual pursuit, to seek knowledge that could not be found in temples or taught by priests. Let yourself imagine that desert solitude. Not harsh or frightening, but peaceful, liberating. Nothing to do, nowhere to be, no one to please, just the endless sand, the endless sky, and your own breath, your own heartbeat, your own consciousness slowly expanding to fill the emptiness around you. In that emptiness there is fullness. In that silence there is a sound so profound it can barely be heard, the sound of existence itself, the hum of reality vibrating at its fundamental frequency. The mystics called this the voice of Ra, the creative utterance that brought the world into being and sustains it still. You can hear it now if you listen carefully, not with your ears but with something deeper, a resonance, a vibration, a presence. It has always been there, beneath all the noise and distraction of daily life. But in this moment of quiet, in this stillness, you can finally perceive it. This is the sound that guided the ancient priests in their rituals. This is the frequency they attuned themselves to when they entered the sanctuary. This is the vibration that animated the statues, that made the spells effective, that opened the gates between worlds, and you have access to it now, in this moment, simply by being still, by being quiet, by being receptive. The boundary between waking and sleeping has vanished entirely. You exist in that twilight realm where anything is possible, where the normal rules no longer apply. You are neither fully conscious nor fully asleep, but suspended between states, floating in the liminal space that the Egyptians knew so well. This is the space where magic happens, where transformation occurs, where healing takes place. The conscious mind, with all its doubts and fears and limiting beliefs, has stepped aside. The deeper self, the part of you that knows things the conscious mind has forgotten, comes forward now. This deeper self remembers ancient truths. It knows the names of power, the words of transformation. It understands the cycles and the patterns. It sees connections that the conscious mind misses, and in this quiet moment it can do its work, healing what needs healing, integrating what needs integrating, preparing you for the day ahead. But that work happens silently, invisibly, without effort or struggle. You need not supervise or control. You need only rest, allowing the process to unfold naturally, trusting in the wisdom of your own depths. The priests of ancient Egypt trained for years to access this state at will, to enter the liminal space consciously and purposefully. They used meditation, chanting, rhythmic movement, controlled breathing, all techniques designed to shift consciousness from ordinary awareness to something deeper and more expansive. You have achieved it now simply by relaxing, by letting go, by surrendering to sleep's gentle pull. What took them years of discipline, you have accomplished through simple release. There is no effort in sleep, no striving, no trying. Sleep comes to those who stop resisting it, who allow it, who welcome it. And it has come to you now. Feel how far you have drifted from waking consciousness. Thoughts arise and dissolve like bubbles in water, leaving no trace. Time has lost all meaning. Past and future have collapsed into an eternal now that contains everything and nothing. You are everywhere and nowhere. You are everyone and no one. The boundaries that normally define you have become permeable, translucent, almost transparent. You blend into the darkness, becoming one with the night, one with the silence, one with the deep peace that underlies all existence. The ancient Egyptians would say you are in the duat now, the realm between life and death, the space where transformation occurs. But unlike the deceased who journey through the duat never to return to their bodies, you will return when morning comes. You will wake, refreshed and renewed, carrying with you perhaps some fragment of dream, some whisper of the wisdom you encountered in the deep. But morning is infinitely far away. There are hours and hours of darkness left, hours of rest, hours of healing, hours of journeying through realms you will not remember but that will affect you nonetheless. You have all the time you need. There is no rush, no deadline, no pressure. Sink deeper. Let go more completely. Release whatever tiny thread still connects you to waking awareness. You don't need it now. You are safe. You are protected. The rituals have been performed. The spells have been spoken. The amulets are in place. Nothing can harm you here. The gods watch over you, just as they watched over the ancient Egyptians. Ra continues his nightly journey, battling chaos so that order may prevail. Osiris sits in judgment, maintaining cosmic justice. Isis spreads her wings in protection over all who sleep. Anubis guards the threshold between life and death, ensuring that only those whose time has come will cross over permanently. Your time has not come. You're simply visiting, a tourist in the realm of night, a traveller passing through on your way to morning. The gates will open for you when the time is right, and you will return to the world of light and life, carrying blessings from the darkness. But for now, rest. Simply rest. Let the darkness hold you. Let the silence enfold you. Let the peace permeate you, seeping into every cell, every fibre, every particle of your being. You are dissolving now, becoming liquid, flowing, merging with the great stream of unconsciousness that carries all sleepers through the night. Individual identity fades, names lose their meaning. All that remains is pure awareness, witnessing without judgment, experiencing without analysis. This is the peace the Egyptians sought. This is the state they tried to achieve through meditation and ritual. This is the goal of all spiritual practice, to transcend the limited self and merge with something greater, something eternal, something that was never born and will never die. You have achieved it now, not through effort, but through release, not through striving, but through surrender. And in this achievement there is no pride, no sense of accomplishment, for there is no self remaining to feel such things. There is only this: being, awareness, presence, peace. The last thread breaks. The final connection severs. You're completely asleep now, deeply asleep, dreamlessly asleep, falling through infinite darkness toward a rest so profound that it erases everything, a peace so complete that nothing disturbs it. The ancient texts have guided you here. The rituals have prepared the way. The gods have granted their blessing. And now you rest, as the pharaohs rested in their tombs, as the priests rested after their vigils, as all humanity has rested since the beginning of time. Sleep, traveller. Sleep deeply. Sleep completely. The journey through the night has only just begun, and you have far to go before morning. But you need not worry about the distance, need not concern yourself with the destination. Simply float, drift, sink into the darkness that holds you gently, like a mother holding a sleeping child. All is well. All has always been well. All will always be well. This is the great secret, the mystery revealed only to those who surrender completely. There is nothing to fear, nothing to resist, nothing to struggle against. There is only this eternal now, this infinite peace, this perfect rest. The Nile flows on through the darkness. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. The desert winds whisper across ancient stones, and you sleep, cradled in the arms of night, held in the embrace of eternity, resting in the peace that passes all understanding. Sleep now. Dream ancient dreams. Walk with the gods in their hidden realms. And when morning comes, when Ra emerges victorious from his battle with chaos, when the first light touches the horizon, you will wake renewed, reborn, restored to life as Ra is restored each dawn. But that is hours away yet. For now, there is only darkness, only silence, only sleep, profound, complete, eternal. The rituals are finished. The story is told. The journey is complete. Rest now in the silence that follows all stories, in the darkness that follows all light, in the peace that follows all struggle.